Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Dave Percy. On the advisory chart here, hazardous weather graphic, we've got a winter weather advisory here for the Denali Park area, Healy, and the park headquarters out through tonight until 4 p.m. Monday afternoon. Looking for storm totals, snowfall amounts of 4 to 7 inches in those areas, with up to 15 inches in the higher elevations or up in the mountains. And again, that's out until 4 p.m. Monday. On the satellite imagery, you can see low pressure moving eastward. This is a system brought the strong winds across the Alaska Peninsula with the strong gusts at Cold Bay. That's all shifted eastward. Now Kodiak State Airport seeing gusts over 50 miles per hour out of the northwest, drying and clearing out here back up along the west coast. And the front pushing eastward there across the Panhandle brought about 1.5 inches of rain in 12-hour period today to Dry Bay there southeast of Yakutat. And then amounts weren't quite that heavy down the Panhandle. Otherwise today with the main low center, 1/2 inch falling at Alyeska, as well as Portage, and then back along the Alaska Range, Sparivon also had 1/2 inch of precipitation. Most of that falling as snow, turned to snow last night and has been falling as snow all afternoon there. Otherwise, lighter amounts up here to the north and then out to the west. You can see the next big storm there quite vividly here coming in, came across the Kamchatka Peninsula, the Sea of Okhotsk, a very impressive looking cloud shield with that, just starting to reach the Pribilof Islands. That's the higher clouds actually associated with the warm front, cold front trailing back to the southwest. And you can see the area of high pressure in between the two systems here moving eastward, and that'll be coming across south central Alaska and the central interior tomorrow for a break in conditions, but this will be rolling right into the southwest coast. It's a pretty good jet stream back here. We'll push that about 100 knots or so right into the western interior. On the chart today, 977 millibars, that rather intense system up there over the northwest Bering, and the front trailing back in towards Shimia. And you can see still breezy here across the Alaska Peninsula today with anywhere gusts 40 miles an hour here along the Aleutian Range and back across Bristol Bay. As I mentioned, gusts over 50 miles an hour occurring at Kodiak State Airport, and very close to that at Akiak as well, with clouds, showers, and rain here. Cook Inlet, a little more continuous, as I mentioned, from roughly Alyeska to Portage, and along the North Gulf Coast there, about 3/4 inch falling in Yakutat, and the front here spreading rain across the Panhandle, again becoming more showery behind the front. This band of moisture lifting northward with some areas of rain, as much as maybe 1/3 inch falling in some areas for one of the heavier amounts. But back to the west, much lighter, just a few hundredths of an inch at the most, with conditions again drying out. Areas of light snow up along the Arctic coast. Very light snow flurries going on many areas up there and tapering off in toward the Brooks Range. Forecast for tonight's graphic, that low kicks off to the northeast there. Front moves south of the Queen Charlotte Islands by 4 a.m. tomorrow morning, but the another low center here creeping eastward, that'll continue to spin. Surges of showers and rain into the Panhandle. One will come in showers, but interacting with the terrain, it'll be just about like a general rainfall there, and another one back behind. Winds pick up here through Kachemak Bay and the Barren Islands. Could see some storm force winds with clearing skies drying out here for south central Alaska. Look for decreasing clouds, Susitna, Manuska Valley areas. Moisture slowly moving eastward, but kind of hung up along the Alaska range there. And again, with any elevation at all, that'll be in the form of snow. Kind of a mixed precipitation up over the eastern interior. Areas of light snow, fog. Flurries continue from Brooks Range, crest of the mountains there, on out to the Arctic coast. And then you can see this front rapidly pushing rain along the coast and inland, at least to Bethel there, back across St. Mary's and reaching the Seward Peninsula area. Wet and windy for St. Lawrence Island, front trailing back, some rain hung up there over the far western Aleutians with this good southwest flow just driving that right on in, but clearing and drier, more in the influence of the high pressure here. Fairly strong, center 1,042 millibars here, so that's keeping the Alaska Peninsula and the central and eastern Aleutians fairly dry. For tomorrow, that front continues to move eastward here, begins to slow down a little bit as it does, but rain will come west all the way up to the western Alaska range. And again, that'll be in the form of snow with any elevation at all. Mixed precipitation back to the northwest. A little milder, so that's going to be rain here from the Seward Peninsula back towards St. Lawrence Island. Quite windy conditions as well. Could see gusts 40, 50 miles an hour there. Savunga right up into the Bering Strait areas with lighter southwest winds across the Bering Sea. A little bit stronger in advance of the front. High pressure develops and builds in, but moving eastward. That'll make for a nice day, at least a start, for Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley. Clouds increase in the afternoon, and again, precipitation right up to the Alaska range, but dry weather here all the way up to the North Slope. Very nice day for the North Gulf Coast. Mostly sunny skies for Monday with just some showers possible here over the northern panhandle. Still a pretty good chance of showers, especially early in the day, and there'll be more of a rain condition there down to the south as this whole system slowly begins to push southeastward. And then the outlook for Tuesday, this front drives eastward and hangs up here through the central interior areas. Another developing system back out to the west there actually kicks in the southerly flow, so this portion of the front will actually shift back to the north. That may take the permafrost out of the rain altogether, but a lot of moisture surging northward here ahead of the front and the southerly flow. So rain possibly moderate, maybe heavy at times coming into the Fox Islands, central Aleutians. Windy and wet weather back out towards Shimei and Attu. Mostly sunny for the Panhandle, and not too bad, partly to mostly sunny for the North Gulf Coast, Copper River Basin. Look for clouds here for Cook Inlet, with the rain again getting hung up along the Alaska Peninsula and also in the north. Low temperatures forecast for tonight, 15 to 20 up there through the Brooks Range. Otherwise, mid to upper 20s, North Slope, Arctic coast. Lower to mid 30s here through the central interior out to the Seward Peninsula. Mid to upper 30s south of the Alaska Range, and lower 40s across the Panhandle. Mid 40s out in the Aleutians. For the highs tomorrow, lower 30s here up along the eastern Arctic coast, right around 31, so staying just a shade below freezing, but shade above freezing there from the central coast back to the mid 30s there around Point Hope. Mid to upper 30s, Kotzebue Sound, and then lower 40s there on the south side of the peninsula from Nome. Mid 40s St. Lawrence Island, upper 40s here across the southwest. Bristol Bay, lower 50s, as well as Kodiak there, highs in the lower 50s, with temperatures in the upper 40s to mid 50s for the Panhandle. Looks like mostly in the 40s, south central Alaska, mid 40s for the Copper River Basin, near 40 for the Tanana Valley. And lows for Tuesday morning looking like this, down into the lower 30s anyway, maybe the upper 20s into the Copper River Basin, and upper 30s, lower to mid 30s here for south central Alaska, lower 40s, staying mild out in the southwest. Teens for the Brooks Range, and 20s out along the Arctic coast. And moving on to the Tuesday afternoon, high temperatures, lower 50s here for the Panhandle, and we've got mid 40s, mid to upper 40s there in the southwest, and really not much change going on up over the Arctic coast, with temperatures staying mostly in the lower to mid 30s there, highs through the Brooks Range in the upper 20s, and out west, lower 50s there, staying mild for the Aleutians.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, IFR here reaching the coast from the Bering Strait all the way down there to into and west of Kuskokwim Bay. Marginal VFR covering the Alaska Peninsula all the way out to Shimei and Attu and the Pribilofs. Kind of a narrow break of VFR here over the west central interior. IFR over the extreme, well, from the Wrangell Mountains up to about possibly the North Waitok area, northern panhandle to start with marginal VFR on down to the south. And then for tomorrow afternoon, marginal VFR across much of the southeast coast. VFR, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, northward, Copper River Basin, Cook Inlet, into the interior valleys, all the way up to the Brooks Range, marginal on the Arctic coast, and now a big area of IFR pushing well inland here across the deltas, right up, almost up to the western Alaska Range by tomorrow afternoon, extending back to the northwest toward Point Hope and Cape Lisburne, and then extending across the Pribilofs, trailing all the way back out to Shimei. That pretty much holds stationary. Tuesday morning, actually some good development out to the west there. Is going to turn the flow more southerly, so this band will be lifting northward, so the Pribilofs, IFR becoming marginal. IFR now right up against the Alaska Range, maybe some of that spilling over a little bit, but for now it looks like the mountains are going to do a pretty good job of blocking that. Through Tuesday morning, IFR back to the northwest, and from there on Tuesday afternoon, a little bit of an improvement here. Again, this band still rather stationary after shifting north. This kind of broke off now, so marginal VFR across the coast into the Bristol Bay area. VFR continues Cook Inlet, Madanuska, Susitna Valley, Copper River Basin, 40 Mile Country. Marginal VFR, though, over most of the remainder of interior Alaska. VFR, Prince William Sound, all the way down across the Panhandle to Dixon Entrance. And for Anatuvik, VFR tomorrow, same forecast for Adigan, good VFR flying there. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR becoming marginal. Rainy, VFR becoming marginal. Look for IFR by late afternoon on the western entrance, and a little bit later for Lake Clark and Merrill. Windy, marginal VFR becoming VFR as moisture pulls off to the east, and that same pattern also for Isabel, starting out marginal, becoming VFR. And then Metasta starting out maybe IFR, and it'll be a slow process getting to VFR. It may stay marginal through much of the afternoon. And for Tanita, VFR as well as Portage looking good. And Chilkoot and White starting out IFR, becoming marginal later in the day. Freezing levels, 2,000 feet, northern panhandle, 4,000 feet down to the south. At the surface here covering, well, just about a good portion of the interior, not quite down into south central Alaska. Warmer air out here over the eastern Bering Sea, 4,000 feet, warms up to about 6,000 to 7,000 feet over the eastern Aleutians. Icing with all the moisture riding in on that strong southwest jet. Widespread areas of light rime icing with some isolated areas of considerable moderate at times, mostly above 4,000 feet here across the interior, maybe a little lower up to the north, and then trailing on back across the Pribilofs to the western Aleutians, and could be some icing here up over the northeast interior areas and across the southeast coast, mostly above 4,000 feet, mixed type icing. And for the winds aloft, the jet stream for tomorrow, ridging poking up here to the west, the upper low now shifting off well into Canada, but the trough extending southwest across the panhandle here, and pretty deep trough over the eastern Gulf of Alaska, northeast Pacific, but southwest flow here, 120 knots, driving that moisture field well into the western interior. 9,000 foot winds, pretty strong here, 30 to 35 knots, pick up to 40 to as high as 60 knots here as it approaches the southwest coast. 55 knot winds inland, diminishing up to the northeast, higher pressure, lighter winds there, but still this flow coming in 35 knots right into the western Alaska Peninsula. Much lighter here over the panhandle, trough axis right across the area there, but northerlies at about 30 here, coming down, roughly across the Yakutat area. 3,000 feet, about the same pattern here. Pretty light over the panhandle, stronger northerlies through here, and then these southwest winds up into the interior, up to 40 to 50 knots approaching the southwest coast, and then 25 as you get back out toward the western Aleutians, 50 knots across St. Lawrence Island. And for turbulence, widespread moderate chop here, northwest interior, all the way St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula, down to Nunivak Island, Kodiak, and the Aleutian Range.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children, you can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, AKwx, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is AKwx and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, AKwx, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS. And she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And then
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're
So
moving
cool.
the water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
And there's
these,
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way so people can, you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
Oh, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach, that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right? You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is
Okay.
going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right, right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and
Okay.
you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down.
Okay.
And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami
Right.
or something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology
Yes.
and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before.
Yep.
So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about AKwx, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKwx, right? AKwx, Alaska AKwx, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation,
Yes,
so
we are.
more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis, really not much different from yesterday. No big changes, especially looking at it on this scale. Ice forming inside the barrier islands here along the eastern stretch of the coastline in some areas. And that'll probably continue to be about the same, and then maybe increase a little bit more later on in the week. Otherwise, coastal forecasts, coastal water forecasts, marine forecasts, small craft advisories here on the south coast, 25-knot winds but seas, 17 to 18 feet here, falling back to about 16 feet in the north coast with a north wind at 20. Pretty brisk winds for Lynn Canal, south 30 knots, higher gusts, small craft advisories for Stevens Passage, and back down to 20 knots there for Clarence Strait. And for the next day, we've got light west winds up here along the north coast, turning northwest all the way down to the central coast, and then turning north and picking up to about 20 knots, but seas coming down 8 feet here in the north to down to 12 feet in the south, and very light winds over the inside waters with slight seas. Lynn Canal north at 10. And for Prince William Sound tomorrow, northwest winds 25, definitely higher gusts out of the northern and western bays, and that'll extend right into the North Gulf Coast and then increase as you head west, looking at 30 knots here, increasing to 45 knots for the Barren Islands. West winds probably coming down to 40 knots tomorrow for Kachemak Bay, small craft advisory, southern Cook Inlet. And the forecast outlook for Tuesday, southwest breeze at 15 north of the Forelands, otherwise westerly winds here for the area south of the Forelands and Cook Inlet to Kachemak Bay, west 30 knots, 7-foot seas, 25-knot winds, small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, and west winds 30 knots here for the western North Gulf Coast, and northwesterlies diminishing now in Prince William Sound down to 15 knots, seas 3 feet, northwest 25 holds for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And for Kodiak Island, gale warnings coming down to 35 knots tomorrow afternoon on the east side, 25 Shelikof Strait, west 25 also for the Alaska Peninsula, or for Bristol Bay, I'm sorry. Southwest 25 here in the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, west 20 on the Pacific side. And then for Tuesday, southwest 25 for Bristol Bay, 8-foot seas, south 25, 10-foot seas there on the north side of the peninsula. South side, southwest 20, takes a turn to the west and picks up to about 25 knots. Small craft advisories for Kodiak Island and Shelikof Strait. Out in the Aleutians, southwest 20 to 25 knots here for the Fox Islands. Actually, that'll extend back to Atka and Adak. And as you get out toward Amchitka, turning south at 30 knots, and that'll extend all the way out to Shimianatu. And then for Tuesday, those become a little more southeast, holding the same speed there, 11-foot seas. And then southerly winds south to southeast, 25 knots for the remainder of the Aleutians, to just all south, 25 for the Fox Islands. Down to about 20 knots, though, coming across Unalaska Island, 7 to 12-foot seas there. And for the southwest coast, southwest winds from the Pribilofs right up into Kuskokwim Bay at 30 knots, southwest 40 knots here for St. Matthew Island, and southwest 30 knots for the area north of Nunivak Island, all the way up actually to the Bering Strait. And then for the outlook on Tuesday, winds stay all southwest out here. 25 knot small craft advisories kick up to 30 knots there toward Kuskokwim Bay with 12-foot seas. Southwest 25, St. Lawrence Island, winds coming down to 20 knots around St. Matthew. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, kind of light and variable over there on the east side, mainly easterlies at 10 tomorrow, 3 to 4 foot seas, picking up to 15 knots on the west coast, and then from Wales all the way up to Cape Beaufort, east-southeast at 20. Next day, 25 knot winds out of the southwest coming in from the Bering Strait, working in across the Chukchi Sea here. Otherwise, easterlies 10 to 15 knots for the central and western coast, and on the east side, southeast 15. For tonight again, winter weather advisory for Denali Park, Healy, and the headquarters are up to 7 inches of snow by 4 p.m. Tomorrow, rain and snow eastern interior, flurries on the up there on the Arctic coast, rain driving into the interior tomorrow. It makes a pretty good jog all the way across the Kuskokwim Valley to the Alaska Range. Clouds increase to the east there, but pretty nice and dry over the eastern interior. Stays wet over the Panhandle, and the outlook for the next day, low pressure brings some snow to the northwest.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.